Hello there, it's time for some commentary on Steel Division 2. And like with many of my commentaries of late, we're going to start by having this sort of rambly preamble section to the video. Before I really start playing the game, I'm mainly going to be poking around and doing the tutorials. You can see here, there are some video tutorials on the home screen, which when I first saw, I was like, oh dear, that means this game doesn't have a tutorial if it's telling me to go and watch somebody's video. Interestingly, it's not even a video from the developers, it's just somebody's video. I wonder if they're getting paid for doing some of the developers' work for them here. Well, what I did is actually miss the tutorial menu. There is actually a tutorial menu here. I skipped past it because I was so sure it wouldn't exist, and blindly went into the skirmish menu instead. Because the last time I played a Eugen Systems game, Wargame Red Dragon, which is very similar to this, I thought maybe I should have done a skirmish and I would have understood it better. Back when I played that game, by the way, I played it for about half an hour and then ran away because there were too many genocidal people ranting on the home screen, since it has this global live chat thing that it throws in your face. Well anyway, this time there's no global community to annoy me, and we're going to try the skirmish mode, and we see immediately some of the best and worst parts of the game at the same time as we play a skirmish game. Interestingly, the skirmishes actually have a small advantage over the main campaign, because in skirmish mode, it categorizes your units by what they are, which it doesn't do in the main campaign, and there, in the campaign, it's much harder to know what units you have and what they do. Because of the authenticity of the game, everything's written in its native languages, so you sort of have to work out what the units actually are. You can see me here staring at these gigantic cabbages as we enjoy my favourite thing about the game, and this is the reason why I did want to play this game despite being turned off by the previous game from this developer. Because this map system, this battle engine they have, is really cool. The difference between how high you can go when commanding your little icons and how low you can go watching them actually doing things on the ground is super good. And you have all sorts of really authentic unit models from the time, with the authentic names, which is both good and bad as mentioned, and it just made me think this is what I want a World War II strategy game to be like. The separation between top-down strategy and being able to see real things happening on the ground, that combination, an almost Total War-esque formula, is just really good, and that's got to be the game's best selling point. And I really like doing stuff like this, which you might notice not playing the game. Like Total War, it's another case where all of the cool cinematic stuff de facto isn't in the game because you can't do it while playing normally. But if you don't play, if you just sit back and die, you can come down to the ground level and watch some cool stuff happening. And I was like, yes, this is so realistic, it's so authentic. Look at how far away their anti-tank guns can shoot us from, and how the shots glow red hot and sometimes ricochet off the armor and bounce off somewhere else. Super cool, as I said, that's my official review. And coming from something like Company of Heroes to this felt really good. But then we have to contend with the game itself. And the game itself is not what I'm doing here. It's not the thing I'm enjoying that you can do in the game. The game itself mainly takes place at the maximum zoom level, it's mainly written in Russian, and there's plenty to say about it, so we'll be getting into all that. But I was just enjoying this skirmish mode to show off the game as it is. We're not actually going to see much more of this, which is a shame because I thought it was really good. I also think, as a random nitpick, that bullets, when they have tracers here, it looks like they're moving too slowly. More authenticity is required in my World War II authentic strategy game. Well, maybe the anti-tank shots were going too slowly as well, but they seemed good to me based on my extensive experience fighting German anti-tank positions in World War II. Yes, my past life is back to complain. Well, what actually happened is something that happened off screen, which I'll mention here over this footage of the beginning of the real tutorial. I eventually realized the game does have a tutorial, and we'll talk through the tutorial mainly to show you and to show veteran players who might be surprised by this how not correct the tutorial is compared to the actual game. The tutorial gives you various pieces of advice and implies the game is quite different to what it really is, which I found interesting. They've made a tutorial, but not necessarily for the game that you're going to be playing after the tutorial, and certainly not if you want to play multiplayer, which is a whole different world. But the thing I need to mention that happened off screen is that I did go and watch some of those tutorial videos that were advertised on the homepage. I'm sort of against this in practice. It reminds me of when I played, I think it was Battle Brothers, another strategy game that's quite difficult and requires some information to be able to enjoy. In that game, when it first came out at least, on the home page it would pop up and tell you to go and watch a YouTube video, which was something like 40 minutes long, and it was just the developer explaining how to play the game. Well, here we have something similar, but it's worse. We have not the developer not necessarily explaining how to play the game, and the video tutorials you have to watch are much longer, many hours. And I didn't watch many of them, actually. I watched the first one. It was about 20 minutes long, and during that 20 minutes, the guy never got off the main menu. That's how much there was to say. And what he was mainly doing is going through parts of the main menu and going, wow, I could make a whole video just talking about this part, so I won't, and skipping over it. So essentially, there's some real complexity, but I think it mainly only applies to multiplayer, because you're supposed to be using these menus to build up a deck of sorts. You build a regiment of troops with all kinds of real World War II units, and you can mix and match various things to make your strategy something. We're not going to be looking at that, so that's going to save us some time. I did also watch, though, the campaign tutorial of how to play the campaign. Again, it was inaccurate. I'm not going to show that video here, so I'm not going to go into what exactly was inaccurate about it, but I'll just say it was made years ago, and for whatever reason, they've changed various things since then, but they're still advertising the old tutorial on the main menu. So it doesn't quite give you the right idea, but it's close anyway. It gives you some correct ideas, and then you have to find out the rest the hard way, which we'll be doing in the big portion of this video after this initial rant. But here, since we're in the tutorial, I might as well mention how the game works at its sort of moment-to-moment level. What you do is you select units and you say, take that place, and they'll go and do it for you. But you also have the choice to micromanage how they're going to do it and change their orders. So it's a mix between high-level, sort of colonel-level leadership and low-level captain-level leadership, which is quite nice. There's only one big feature where the game almost does the thing that I want. It's real close, so I'll just mention it now so I don't have to rant about it later, but I certainly will. It is that it should be a little bit more like Hearts of Iron 4, where when you're telling your units what areas to capture, as it stands, you tell them to capture a circular area around the S you can see on the screen there. So they're going to capture like the right-hand side of this village in this case. But what you really need to do is to have your troops capture a line. You need to be able to draw a line across the map and say that's the front line, and tell your entire army to get to that place, so that you could draw the line along strategic terrain features and things. Because right now, if you tell your troops to just capture a bit of a forest or something, half the troops will sit at the back, they won't necessarily face the direction you want. If you could draw a line, the automation would be much closer to what you could achieve with micro, but it would be much easier. So it's all about lines over circles when it comes to the automated orders. That's all I want to say. So anyway, let's see what else the tutorial has to offer. So far we've learned how to capture a town with a few units, which is useful to know and was quite fun to do, but again it's misleading because in this very small scale battle, you have the time, the mental space to micro your units. In a real scale battle where the fields are gigantic and the number of units is very large, realistically, you will not be microing your units as they approach a town. You'll just hope they do it because you're looking at something else. Well, we'll get to that. The second tutorial is a repeat of the first, really, where you have to deploy your troops, and it just holds your hand a little bit less, which I think is a really good idea. Just repeat the same thing, but with something more like a real level of complexity. Although again, we're still playing this close to the ground, microing the units, and having a more Company of Heroes-esque experience. I thought this was really good. It makes me think they should probably use this game engine to make something more like a Company of Heroes style RTS, where it's a combat puzzle. It's just telling you to do specific things, and your enemy is scripted to do certain things. It's not sort of playing against you in the bot sort of sense, like a multiplayer opponent. Which is what the game actually is, and we'll have to get to that soon enough. The next tutorial was how to hold a position, which is nothing really, because your troops will automatically hold a position if they're there, but you can specifically order them to hold a position. I think the difference there is that if they lose it, they might try and get it back, although in practice they don't, as far as I can tell, but anyway. For the next and final part of the tutorial actually, it just tells you to capture this map, and we get something a bit more like a regular battle. We start by deploying our troops into our deployment zone, but it's actually a lot easier to do so in the tutorial than in real battles, for various reasons. One of them is something I hinted at. You can see on the left, your units are categorized by what they are. In real gameplay, they are not categorized by what they are, so you have to know what the names mean. And, well, I've hinted at this as well, because the names are written in German or Russian, you can only play as those two factions, at least without the DLCs. you kind of need to know what the words mean to know what units you're deploying are. But here in the tutorial, it tells you a little bit about what they are by categorizing them. And obviously, I'm saying it should be doing that the entire time. So the way the game actually works is not necessarily battles. And it was here we start to realize this game isn't necessarily going to give me what I want. All of the battles are kind of like encounters, where each side gradually comes onto the map bit by bit. You're drip feeding units onto the map and telling them to capture territory. So it's more like two columns of troops encountering each other without knowing they were there, and then slowly deploying for battle while also fighting at the front. And I think this is because the game is primarily a multiplayer game. And this battle system is for multiplayer. It's to have a balanced start where neither side is deployed on the battlefield and you fight for map control. In the single player and campaign mode, this makes much less sense, but we'll just have to deal with it. We'll talk about it later, I suppose, as we see some cases where it doesn't really make any sense. What you actually have to do in the game is not necessarily defeat the enemy or capture anything in particular. You just need general map control. You need to control enough of the map to make the bars on the right go down. You can see right now, we are losing. It says we're going to have a minor defeat in 10 minutes, so if I don't capture more territory within 10 minutes, we'll be declared the loser. I think that's because the enemy controls a little bit more of the map than me. So the aim of battles is simply to control more of the map than the enemy, or in some cases it's just a certain amount of the map. You might need to control like 80% of the map to be declared a winner in certain circumstances. Well, in this tutorial battle, it's easier than regular battles because there are just fewer kinds of units on the field, the battlefield is smaller than they usually are, and we have the opportunity, I suppose, to gradually work out how the game works at the lower level and the meta level, to know things like, can you run into machine gun fire like you can in something like Company of Heroes? Well, you can't, as it turns out, and just other things like whether it's safe to approach enemies from flanking positions, what you can do with buildings and things like that. One thing with buildings I noted during this battle is that you can only put one unit in a building, and I had a little bit of a moment where I wanted to put a machine gun crew and a rifle squad in a building or in a church so they could overlook an area, and it didn't let me, and I thought, well, that's a very small church, isn't it? The machine gun crew is only 5 people, but I suppose they couldn't find room for the other 10. I suppose that's what they call Lebensraum, isn't it? Well, maybe when we play as the Soviets, we'll be able to have a Brezhnevka-style garrison system where everybody gets into a big building altogether. You know what? It's probably not like that. By the way, I have COVID-19 right now, but I decided to talk to you about the tutorial system in Steel Division 2 instead of doing anything like recovering, because I know quite a lot about what's a good priority for my life. Anyway, the battle goes okay in the end. We advance far enough that it stops counting down to me losing, so that's nice. Now we're just in a stalemate. You might note, the battles take a long time, partially because they are divided up into phases, as it calls them, which is the process of gradually deploying your army onto the field. After, say, 30 minutes, the army you have for the battle will be deployed, and then you have to make these timers go down to capture enough of the map to kick the enemy off the field as well. You can shorten battles by capturing the map really fast and prevent the entire deployment of both sides' troops into the map. Well, we'll see that later on. For now, we eventually advance enough that we are gradually reducing the enemy's bar, and after 10 minutes from here or so, we will be able to win this tutorial battle. One thing I really struggled with was deploying units. You can see in the top left, I have loads of deployment points available. I could have many more units coming onto the field than we have right now, but I kept forgetting to do it because it's micro. And, well, there's another reason I wasn't doing it very much, and we'll talk about that later, I suppose, when it became really annoying, the thing I'm thinking of here. Here was the one chance I got to zoom in and look at something. I decided I didn't need to give any orders for a few seconds, so I came down and watched a tank kill some infantry. And again, that's the sort of thing that I wanted to be in the game more, but even here, in this scaled-down baby's version of the battle system, you're rarely going to get a chance to look at what's actually happening in detail, which is a shame because they have bothered to model it and simulate it, and I think we're missing out by not having more of that in the game. So I capture enough of the map that some guy says I'm now ready to defend the fatherland. Well, that's good, isn't it? We've learned something or other about the game. The thing is, I'm going to accuse this man of lying, the dirty Nazi.
We're not really ready to defend the fatherland because there are so many other bits and bobs to the battle system that we didn't really go through in the tutorial system, and the tutorial is now over. Things like tanks, mortars, planes, various kinds of vehicle tactics, line of sight, defensive buildings. Well, we're going to learn those in what they call the hard way. But first, we'll have a brief mention of the rest of the tutorials. There's another tutorial system which is more comprehensive, and it just talks about the campaign map mechanics. This tutorial system is much more simple because it's really just saying how to move around and start battles. It did actually crash, by the way, the first time I tried to play it, so I'll just point that out. Here we are on the map, and what I'll say about the way the campaign map is presented is that it's a few steps away, I think, from being completely clear what's going on. While this tutorial was quite good at explaining what we've got here, and even going into detail about what the UI elements were, which the battle map tutorial system didn't bother to do, what the UI elements are isn't the best setup, really, because some of the key information, like how strong a battalion is, isn't the easiest thing to find. It even confused me here. One of the stats your battalions have is melee combat. Well, don't be misled by that. It's talking about small arms combat, really. Maybe that would be a better word for it. I don't know what the best word for what they were going for would have been, but melee, which, at least in English, means something specifically that isn't what it's talking about here, isn't the best choice, I think. This game was made in France, I believe, so it's been translated, so there may be some things like that that come into play. Another thing to mention is that we're looking at the map here, and you can see the various models which represent the groups of units you can move around on the map. You don't control what's in these groups, by the way. It's nothing like Total War. You're just given sets of stuff to move around, and they're certainly not equal. So it's difficult to know, like, if a model on the map represents an independent company or an entire battalion of things with many companies inside it. And also on the left, you can see the breakdown of what's actually inside these models, so what you'll get if you use this thing in a battle. The thing is, the really key information, like how many troops and tanks it has, is written in like size 6 font. You can just about see it somewhere on the left there. The main section of the UI is used to show you this list of the various unit types it has. But that's just really not useful for a new player. I think you need to know what all those things are, especially because it's written in Russian here, most of the time anyway. But the pictures represent something or other, so we can see that the first automatic weapons company or something has 9 squads of guys with weapons. But I suppose we don't really know what that means here from the outside. You can bring up tooltips to see what those pictures mean. But for me, for someone just looking at it in the abstract, just saying this regiment has 500 troops in it and they probably have rifles or something, that's about the level of knowledge that I would be fine with. And that level of knowledge is very much sidelined to give you more detailed but hard to understand knowledge that ultimately I couldn't use for anything because I didn't really know what it was saying. So the tutorial goes on to tell you how to auto-resolve a battle. Interestingly, in the video tutorial that is in the old version of the game, there's something called semi-auto-resolve, which is such a good idea that appears to no longer be in the game, where they used to have a system where you could partially control what happened in the auto-resolve. And in a game where the manual resolves are really long, being able to have a short but not completely out of control way to resolve a battle is just ideal. They got rid of it maybe because it was too good, maybe because they wanted people to play the tactical battles more. That's the sort of thing developers will sometimes do. Well, anyway, we come here to the campaign menu. I am supposedly ready to start, and, well, we'll see as I learn all these things along the way that I wasn't ready to start. It was lying to me. We're going to play the third campaign because it claims to not be as hard as the earlier campaigns. They weren't in any sort of difficulty order. Speaking of difficulty, we have this thing that says easy, medium or hard, not actually labelled technically as a difficulty level. We're selecting something over here, and the game's really mocking me here. As someone who likes to know what the difficulty levels actually do, they've got this drop down which has all this space around it where they could have written what the difficulty level does, but yes, they mock me by just having a huge open space, a weirdly set out UI. At the very least, writing the word difficulty would be a normal thing to do in this case. And the reason why it annoys me a bit when it doesn't tell you what a difficulty level does is, well, for the usual reason of not really knowing what you're getting, and because it's disheartening. When a game doesn't tell you what the difficulty level does, that means it usually does something stupid, and they can't tell you because it would be embarrassing. They would rather you think that the game's doing something cleverer than it really is, so they just don't tell you. For example, I remember seeing people in Total War forums thinking that the difficulty level changed the AI's behavior, which would be great if it did that, but of course it doesn't, and because in the early days it never told you what the difficulty level did, you might be led to believe it was changing the AI's behavior and it's not just cheating, effectively. Well, this is probably a case where just some numbers change if you change the difficulty level. You might have noted I went for easy in the end because I had low morale, effectively. I don't know what that does, so let's just find out. Let's see how easy it is. Here's the campaign map then. This is what we'll be seeing for the rest of the video. Our goal is to take that place with a Nazi flag in the top left, and there's also a Nazi army inside the town that's near where we deployed on the right-hand side of the map. Also across the map we have these partisan units which you can move around, but here's a case where while they're given equal prominence on the map, they're not equally strong to other things on the map, so these are probably not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with another model from the enemy army, we could say. What we need is some sort of power indicator, or one that's different to what it has right now. It does have that thing on the left where it says ABC and has the melee, armor, and artillery stat. Some units have like melee stats of 0, so does that mean they can't attack? Well, no, it's because these numbers are very small. They're rounded to the nearest number, I guess, and you'll find that virtually everything has a number of either 1 or 2, so they probably needed to make it, instead of like a strength out of 1, make it a strength out of 10 or something, so that there could be more division there, so that you could see what the strength of a unit actually was. Knowing that virtually everything has a strength of 1 doesn't tell you very much, because it varies by like 100% either way what actually counts as having a strength of 1. Well, that's that. What we need to do now is work out what on earth we're actually going to do. We're here in a strategy game. We need a strategy to get to the top left of the map. You only have 13 turns to do it. It's a very short campaign in that regard, but because the battles take so long, it is going to take a long time to do it. And while we go that way, we need to keep in mind that there are tons of enemy units behind our lines because we are also behind their lines, a confusing starting setup. As I begin in turn 0, I found myself mostly paralyzed for what to do because there were so many different choices. So we're skipping over to when I decided to move along the road, a bold choice. This is a game where you can move anywhere, but moving on the road is usually easier. You can move much further on the roads. And the only thing I wanted to say here is that there could have been some benefit to there being a less complicated campaign than this. This was advertised as the least complicated campaign. But what we potentially need is something where you have like 5 units. Like you start this campaign with like 20 things to control, and more will come in every turn. It might be easier to have a tiny map and just be like, capture this set of 3 villages or something using only 4 regiments. So you can get a bit used to playing on the campaign map in something similar to that tutorial battle we had earlier. So with so many things to control, I gradually came up with the bold idea of just driving down the road at the enemy and seeing what happened, of course. But I am going to leave some units behind to block off the roads where we sort of have this other German area encircled. We can't see what's in there, so we don't know how much stuff's in there. Turns out there was loads in there, but we'll find that out later, the hard way, of course. The other thing to keep in mind is we've got our partisans, and what I thought we could do is potentially ambush the roads back here, because enemy reinforcements will be coming onto the campaign map from over here and then driving down the road towards us. There are loads of forests beside the roads, and I thought maybe the partisans can do something with this. Well, as far as I can tell, they can't. The partisans act like regular military companies, so if you want them to engage the enemy, well, you just have to go for it. You have to charge at them, and you'll get the same mechanics as a regular battle. That meaning you'll lose if you don't take map control, which is very much not what partisan-style forces are about. We need to be able to ambush or skirmish with the enemy, or have it so that if we initiate a battle and just leave, it doesn't say you lost and then your forces get demoralized and disorganized. There are all sorts of penalties you have for technically losing a battle, even if nothing bad actually happens. It's all about that map control, which we shall see as we go along, no doubt. So anyway, any plans I had to do with using the partisans to do something cool didn't come to anything, because if you can do anything cool with them, I didn't find out how to do it, and that was the end of that. Here is the start of the next turn, where we can see how you deploy units onto the field. You have another number at the top left, where you can buy more things from nearby that will come onto the map for you. And what those things are varies a lot, and as I said, the models on the map can represent all manner of things. You don't necessarily know what they are by just looking at them, you just get the idea. So if it's a picture of a tank, it's probably some number of tanks. The exact number, well, you'll have to do some more research and get your magnifying glass out to look at the UI to find that out. What I want to do strategically is take this crossroads I'm looking at here, because that will block off the enemy from escaping that pocket to the north and will allow us to close the pocket, which does have some strategic purpose because the colour of the map represents where you can take supplies. Supplies is something that's happening in the background essentially quite frequently, and it can impact gameplay. We'll see some examples later, and I suppose I'll rant about it then. So we're using some units to just dig in along the roads near the town in the hopes that the Germans won't push out. There are actually so many Germans in the town that what I'm leaving here is really not sufficient to hold them in if they really tried to get out. Luckily, they didn't really try to get out for the most part, so we're going to get away with that weak setup, while most of the other units I could be using to block them are going to pursue the stuff to the northwest and start generally moving towards the objective. Here's an example of how you start a battle. You click on an enemy unit you want to be the focal point of the battle, essentially, and then it shows you everything that could come and join the battle and what phase it will show up in. That's the ABC thing. There is an arbitrary limit of 5 things you can bring into the battle. So for example here, the fact I'm deploying some partisans, which is just a few guys, means that I can't deploy planes, for example. There are random trade-offs you have to make because you can only bring 5 named detachments into the fight. I'm not quite sure why it's like that. I guess for micro purposes or game design purposes, to make it not too complicated, it doesn't want to let you start a battle that would be really hard to control or something like that. Well, I ended up not fighting that battle and switched to fighting an easier looking one over here in the east, where this enemy group of troops is just sort of standing out in this swampy area not doing very much. And I thought, let's go off the road and just charge into them and just kill them now, and then we'll still be vaguely going in the right direction for my objective anyway, and we'll see what happens. When you start a battle, here's the first new thing to learn that it doesn't tell you in the tutorial. A certain amount of your army is AI controlled. That's a pretty big deal. Although you do have the option to take control of everything yourself, it's just that that would be so many things to control that you might not really be doing anything useful with most of them most of the time if it was just you controlling everything. And that will certainly apply to me with my poor micro and decision paralysis half the time. So I gave everything it recommended to the AI and just took the first named group into battle myself. And in Phase A, it's going to be just this group fighting, so it's just me for the start. My big strategy here to rush an anti-tank crew into this church just about works, which is useful because infantry units count as vehicles before they deploy. All infantry units start on the map inside a vehicle of some kind, so you can use anti-vehicle weapons against infantry up until the point they first get out. Then, curiously, the vehicle disappears, which was a very unexpected mechanic. If you have a transport vehicle, you only get one ride, essentially. You can't deploy a group to an area and then say, right, I'm done here, and go back to your vehicles hidden in the woods or something and drive somewhere else on the map. You deploy somewhere and then you're sort of stuck there because the infantry walk very slowly. They can't sprint, as far as I can tell. Although there is a move fast button, you see it sometimes in the bottom right, sometimes it pops up on certain units, which I only discovered how to use, I think, in the very last battle I fought in the campaign. Essentially, it's a thing that causes the AI for movement to focus more on avoiding rough terrain, something like that, so you can get around the battlefield faster. Well, anyway, all I'm doing is trying to take some points and trying to not lose. We have already enough of the map that we are going to win if things stay as they are. And once the AI shows up, things will be easier because somebody else will be playing for me as well. And because in this case, the group we're attacking doesn't have a Phase B wave coming in, this battle will just get easier and easier. So it ended up being a nice, gentle way to get into the full scale of the battle system. What we're not going to be doing in this video, though, is really commentating on what happened in the battles in particular, because there are lots of them. They all took a very long time. And, well, we'll just be here forever. I think in the past I probably would have gone for a blow-by-blow sport-style commentary of everything that happened in all the battles, but this time I don't think I'm going to. What I'll just do over this footage of nothing in particular happening is mention another factor which caused me to not deploy many units. You can see once again I don't have that many things on the field, and I was going to talk about why that was. So I think I'll just mention it here because we do have an example of it, and I'll talk about the bonus extra reason as well. You can see me deploying troops right now, and it's not the easiest thing. The first challenge is knowing what they are, because unlike in the tutorial or in multiplayer, the drop-down list for what pools you're selecting units from doesn't categorize them by what they are. It categorizes them by which formation they're from. So, for example, you take something from the 3rd company of a regiment, and I didn't know at first whether that was important, whether the different companies had different parameters, or was there a reason why it was making it be subdivided like this and not just showing me the entire brigade at once, for example. Well, that's one challenge. The other challenge is, of course, knowing what the words on these pictures mean, because when you're deploying GV Komrotti, you may not know what GV Komrotti is, and I probably still don't know. I think it's like light infantry or recon troops or something. You gradually come to know what they are, but there were plenty of cases where I started deploying anti-tank crews against infantry and things like that, because I didn't know what I'm doing. Looks like I'm deploying some Komrotti right there into battle at close quarters, probably a bad idea. Well, we can work it out slowly if we ever have time to read the tooltips in between frantically deploying. And part of the franticness of deploying is something you might have noticed is happening all the time. Whenever you deploy a unit, it closes the deployment menu. This drove me absolutely insane. I was so mad about this because it's such a small thing, and it makes the game so much harder to play on a panicked micro level, which was about the level I was playing the game. If you want to deploy different things from different companies all at the same time, you're in trouble. One thing you can actually do is pause the battle. You're allowed to stop time and do your deployments. So in that way you could deploy a large amount of things at once. But in practice, if you want to be cool like me and play it in real time as if it was a multiplayer battle, you're stuck with this system where you have to deploy one unit and then go back through the multiple clicks menu. It's 3 or 4 clicks to deploy a unit, or 5 because you have to pick somewhere for it to go as well, or potentially even more if you want to give it an order on the way in. You can do things like, when you deploy your infantry in a vehicle, say once you get to your destination automatically get out of the vehicle, otherwise they'll do things like, well, you can see it happening there, the Gvardia sitting in a truck are just sitting in their vehicle on a hillside. An anti-tank gun might have seen them and blown them up while they were just sitting there and I wasn't paying attention. I could have told them to get out, and then the infantry on their own have some AI that will basically try to stay alive if they're not inside their vehicle. So they'll run to cover and wait for you to give them an order. Well, the good news about this battle is that the AI has showed up, so we're fine now. The AI is just going to carry this for me. But yes, this maddening choice, such a small choice with a huge impact to constantly close the menu. God damn it, I was getting more angry than I can possibly convey about this, mainly just because I was really stressed, because I didn't really know what to do, didn't know what was going on. And the one thing I knew I needed to do was not float those command points. I needed to get everything on the field for maximum opportunity. And the game was actively trying to stop me from doing that, and I didn't understand why. I was on the verge of just giving up entirely. Like, why would it be like this? This is so annoying. There's one saving grace though. I eventually found that somewhere in one of the menus you can tick something so that the menu is open when you decide it should be open, which is nice, isn't it? You can just have it be an open and closable menu, like in the good old days, like in menus of old. So, we're going to get around this problem eventually, but for now, that's one of the reasons why I wasn't deploying units. It's just a little bit too difficult, and as far as I can tell, this is for no reason. It's such a small UI element as well. It doesn't even cover up the screen. There's so little to be lost just leaving that open. And in this case, because they have already developed a way to keep it open, all I'm saying is have it be open by default. Looks like I'm going wild there, just clicking all over the place. I don't know, I was probably having a mental breakdown at this stage. Too many clicks. The other thing I wanted to mention, and yet another reason why I wasn't deploying troops that much, even right now, when I obviously could be deploying more, but I'm just straight up not, is, well, possibly because we don't really need to, but the other reason, the secret reason, isn't even visible on the screen, so I'll just tell you what it is. I'm capturing this footage using NVIDIA Shadowplay, which is a really good footage capture program, the best I've ever used by far. There's only one problem. It has a little green circle that appears while you're capturing footage, and that green circle is very small, it's right in the corner, but as it happens, what is also very small and right in the corner is the number 42 up there at the very top left, the number of deployment points or command points that you currently have. And yes, it was underneath the green circle that shows that I'm recording. So, When I was playing, I legitimately could not see that number. Now that's a handicap. We are playing with not knowing your command points, challenge run rules engaged. I could tell that something was going on there. When it was 2 digits, you could see the edges of the digits, so you could work out that something was up there. But it was just one more thing that was in the way, quite explicitly, of me deploying my troops properly. So generally speaking, the process of getting troops from off the map to on the map is a disaster, and that stacked on top of the fact I was already a little bit perplexed and confused coming into this, thinking, why are my troops not on the map? Like, why can't I deploy as a united front? Why can't I just deploy the regiment? Why do I have to deploy 10 guys at a time, like in single file? Isn't this the worst way to engage in a battle? Well, it's because it's got multiplayer mechanics in the single player, basically, that's the reason. We won the battle after all that ranting, and you get all sorts of stats you can look at. You can see which of your guys killed which other guys. It even gives them names as well, so you can really enjoy the losses on your side by name. You also get experience points, I think. You can sort of level up in the multiplayer sense while in single player, so that's something, I suppose. We've won our first battle. I worked out a little bit more about how to play the game, but for the most part the AI was playing that for me. And even when you do control your own units, the AI is usually controlling your units for you, because you just give them those generic orders like seize that area. We did something there. Does this progress towards our objective? Not really, as it turns out, because while you do get points for attacking and destroying enemy units, the only goal of the campaign is to complete the objective, and these units realistically aren't going to ever get to the objective, so the stuff that's going on far away from the objective is just a sideshow, really. So I suppose that's an excuse to not talk about it too much and not make this video too long. One thing that would really speed things up was if the enemy were just to explode, and that is what happens right here. This is the biggest thing that the tutorials don't tell you about, and I still don't understand it despite it being really important. It's possible to completely delete units in certain circumstances. You might have noticed it said they were disorganized there, and on their stats it said that their group had 0 troops in it, which I think is a lie. I think it's sort of saying it has 0 troops available for combat because it's disorganized. Or maybe they are all dead and I was just fighting the ghost of the idea that there might be troops there. I'm not quite sure what this means. Essentially, there is a mechanic for removing enemies that can be used for various things. Here's another chance to save some time. This other group of enemies was out on its own and happened to be in between all of my units. So we can attack from all sides with an auto-resolve. It's going really badly by the looks of things. It's so hard to know what's happening here, because if you look on the bottom left, it says we lost 2 melee units worth of power. The enemy lost 1 melee unit's worth of power, but then the things below, which are the actual losses, makes it look to me anyway like the enemy lost twice as much as us, because they have that huge 50 squads lost at the top of their list. Well, I don't know what happened, but in the end they exploded. So this was a case where it didn't go to a disorganized phase, we didn't have to chase them down, it just decided that we killed them all. So that's useful as well. Clearly there is more to be understood about what the numbers mean, and how you route and destroy enemy pieces on the game board, as it were. Now here's something you can do, which actually was in the tutorial. You can use your bombers to remove a piece from play for a turn. If you bomb a segment of the enemy, they then won't take part in battles that turn. The only difference is that if you bomb anti-aircraft guns, which is what I was doing here, it actually auto-resolves a battle of sorts instead of just removing them from play. And we end up losing a bunch of the bombers. We did take out some of the guns as well. So there I am learning something the hard way. You might have thought that I should know that would happen, but I was thinking sort of strategically. I kept thinking, when I've read reports of World War II battles, air attacks do go against anti-air positions first, because that's an air superiority move. Well anyway, looks like that didn't work. I went to the wrong officer school. Now we're going to do this gigantic decisive battle. Everything I have massed up near those crossroads versus everything they have massed up near the crossroads. Let's do this. I'm going to switch my command to this middle battalion because it's smaller, and I didn't want to control the tanks in particular because I knew I would mess it up. Tanks is another thing that the tutorial didn't mention, unfortunately. They do play sort of differently and have different rules of engagement, or different meta information really, about how you're supposed to use them in the game. Now this battle was quite interesting, I thought. There weren't really any other battles that were like this. This was a battle that I thought was really cool in an immersive sense. I didn't do very well in it, but it seemed to be happening in a very realistic sort of way. Because we're effectively trapped in this forest because there's this huge section of open ground, and the enemy have their anti-aircraft guns firing at us from there, and also something else that I can't see. I think it must be mortars, because stuff's raining down on our forest. They know we're in there, and they're just absolutely bombarding us, and we couldn't get out without losing troops. So I ended up stuck there, and I thought, well, that's pretty realistic. I feel like I was experiencing the same sort of fear of advancing that somebody trying to resolve this situation in real life might feel, just because there are a couple of flak guns in the distance, in a really good position on a ridge and hidden as well. If those icons weren't there, they would be invisible to us, but they can sit there with binoculars, watching us moving across open ground and just sniping away at us easily. Very good stuff. Well, we can actually do a strategy in a strategy game to try and deal with this, because we partially captured a bit of road that goes up to the ridge further down. So I can try to move along the ridge towards the flak guns with something else. My something else for now is this armoured car, which gets shot at point blank range by what I guess was an anti-tank weapon that this mortar crew had or something. Maybe it was the flak gun shooting through all of the trees with a trick shot. Well, it survives and pushes the mortar back, and we do end up capturing the area where the flak guns are. But they were bombarding my infantry, cowering in the trees the whole time, and we lost tons of units to it. Eventually we drive them off the ridge, and now they're out in the open, being fired at from the ridge by us, so how the turntables indeed. As for the rest of the battle, well, it's a good thing I wasn't controlling it, because the AI completely dominated and took the rest of the map on the other side. Effectively, the only part where it went badly was where I was controlling. And now, as you can see, I've just stopped controlling. We're getting notifications that we're under attack and we're losing units. I don't even care. Look how cool this is. This is what I'm more interested in this game. I like watching the units fight because you can come down to ground level and see the micro that the AI is doing. I like that T-34 reversing away from that terrible position it was in, while other ones are sneaking around these farmyards here, taking pot shots at stuff on the ridge that they can probably barely see. It's all very good. Looks like I decided to give my men a haphazard order there. Just somehow get across the open ground. Maybe you'll make it. At least this flak gun is probably going to get taken out. We've got tons of guys shooting vaguely at it. We might be too far away in this case. The actual infantry combat is very loosely simulated. It's not like in something like Company of Heroes, where the troops will actively be using the environment for cover. It's more like if they're in something that's sort of cover, they're just considered to be in cover stat-wise. So if you look at the infantry, it's not going to be the most immersive thing. Just look at the tanks instead. Here I am looking at the losses. We lost tons of stuff right here to the flak guns. I barely did anything in that battle. I took enormous losses. A successful battle overall. But there's a cool picture. Finland looks pretty rad. Anyway, that battle I think technically went well. We did lose tons of tanks because the AI was screwing things up and parking them in front of ridge lines with anti-tank guns on them, that sort of thing. But it probably wasn't that bad, who knows. The enemy also lost a load of stuff, but the main difference this fight will make is that it's going to inflict this disorganized status on these units. And again, you can see on the left that when I select them, it now says they have nothing. We didn't come anywhere close to killing all of them. So when it says they have nothing, it must mean there's nothing there with the commanding officer ready to fight if you showed up. Well, this is something that the game should probably tell us because this seems really important. And we're going to probe some of the rules around it by trying some stuff right now. We still have some action points this turn to start another battle. So I'm going to fight this disorganized group. I sent loads of things into that fight because there was a non-disorganized group in range, so I thought it might trigger some sort of battle. Well, it doesn't, they just explode, so that's easy enough, and it doesn't count as a movement, so we still have our action points. Makes me think I should press in and attack again, of course, but this time there was actually a battle. It must be that if there is a non-disorganized unit in the same phase as the guys you're attacking, so here there are phase A reinforcements, then a battle does happen. But if not, a battle doesn't happen, but the disorganized unit explodes, along with all of the units that are probably technically alive inside it, but you just can't see them. So something's going on there. We end up having a draw for a battle, which for the attacker is a loss, effectively, so nothing happens. Both sides lost some troops, and we've lost our action points as well. But the enemy is still disorganized in front of us, so we're probably in a safe-ish position right there. What is not safe is what I decided to do next. I tried to bring in these partisans behind the enemy, because I thought they might start retreating and maybe the partisans can go in and trigger one of those no-battle battles to just blow up the enemy. Well, actually, the one unit that isn't disorganized just turns around and challenges the partisans to battle. What we can't do is not fight them, which is the most obvious strategy we need to pull here. There's no retreat option if a battle takes place. All you can do is lose, which comes with the disadvantage that losing might make you disorganized. So one missing feature would be organized retreat, just don't give battle. Instead, we have to fight, and again, because we're the partisans, the rules of the game just don't work here. We're still doing the same you have to capture at least half of the map to win thing, even if you're the defender. So to defend, we have to make a massive offense, basically, in this situation, and we can't because the enemy are much stronger than us. Plus, partisans don't have any vehicles, so you have to deploy onto the map on foot, meaning you can't walk very far up the map, whereas the enemy are driving towards you. So the initial map control will heavily favour the non-partisan side. And basically, we fight for 17 minutes, as it says there. We killed loads of enemies just defending forests towards our side of the map, but we're still considered to have lost because we didn't offensively defend. It feels like the rules of the game don't work here. If they attacked my position, I was on a tree line, I just killed loads of them, and then they left. How come they win in the game's logic because they successfully captured the area in front of where I was defending for a bit before they left? I don't know about that. It seems like something needs to change, but it's because it's a multiplayer game, effectively. There's no equivalent thing in multiplayer, and they don't want to make a different rule for single player. Well, on to the next battle, because the stuff I left behind to contain the Germans within the nearby town has to defend. They're trying to get out, basically. And for this battle, we have another new thing to take a look at, the defences system. Because our units here were dug in, that means you can deploy things on the map, so we sort of retroactively decide where we had dug in, ready for battle. And we even get something of a defender's advantage in the form of controlling most of the map as the battle starts. This is decided by whether your regiments are considered to be deployed or moving during their turn. Effectively, if you don't move for a turn, if there is then a battle involving that regiment, it will have more of the area under its control when the fight starts, because it's like it spent a few hours just sort of setting up shop in this zone rather than moving off somewhere. So yes, regular battles are always as if the two forces had just arrived at a point, even when it feels like it shouldn't be like that, possibly because it is turn-based. It's simulating real-time movements, but with turn-based movements. So like back there with the partisans, it seemed like I was sitting in the woods and the Germans were coming at me. I shouldn't have to advance to win. But what the game's trying to simulate is that we were advancing at each other and encountered each other suddenly, unknowingly, and then because after we first saw them, they advanced more than we did, something, we lose. It still doesn't make sense. I was starting to think maybe it does make sense, but now that I'm thinking about it again, it still doesn't make sense. But then again, I do still have COVID, and I'm not willing to employ my brain. What I am willing to do is complain about things mindlessly. Here's something to complain about. I wanted to put some infantry in this trench I'd made on the edge of the woods, but it's just not that easy, and I end up undigging the trench by clicking on it, which is inconvenient. So I think the problem I have here is that the obvious thing would be that you can deploy units into buildings in the deployment phase, but you straight up can't. What you have to do is order units to get off their transports beside the trenches, and then their survival AI will make them look for cover, and they'll probably look at the trench because it's right there and go into it. So it's not like you can have the trench set up with the infantry already in it. And again, it's like, why not? Isn't that what they're for? Shouldn't we be looking out for the enemy if we know they're going to show up? I don't know. We'll drive there later and just see what's up, guys. We're doing this real casual. It's Steel Division 2. It really doesn't want you to deploy. It's not going to let you deploy inside a building. That's way too hard. The nice thing about being dug in and deploying these defenses is you get weapons you don't necessarily have. So you get bunkers that come with anti-tank rifles and anti-tank guns, even if your company, your regiment, doesn't actually have them. So that's useful. This tank is driving right into one of my anti-tank positions. It can do it quite safely because it's probably strong enough to deflect anti-tank rifle armor, but there was an anti-tank gun from the AI further down the road that spots them after they drive up really far. So we stopped a tank, and the enemy do have many tanks in this battle,
because they have a panzer regiment among the group that's attacking us. We found for the most part that we couldn't do much against them, but the good news is that infantry are really good against tanks at point-blank range, as we see here. A single grenade, a regular grenade the infantry carry, will take out even the heavier tanks in one hit, which was surprisingly powerful. So right here, we just need this Gvardia unit to be attacked even more, really, to take out these enemy tanks. The weakness to this plan is that if they don't drive into grenade range, you can't do anything. So having the defenses with an open face like this isn't a very good idea for defending against tanks with infantry. But it can be done. Sometimes the AI drives right up to your entrenchments and gets killed. Sometimes they don't. Here's a case where I'm hoping this Stug will drive right up to the Gvardia there. I think you can fiddle with the settings on the infantry so they won't show themselves until the enemy are right in front of them to make this more likely to work. I didn't look at it, but in the top right it says Stug 3 destroyed. That was probably because we got the grenade off in the end. So we are taking out some enemy tanks even with a lack of anti-tank options, which is nice. But we still aren't really going to defeat them in this way. They are able to push wherever they want, it's just that they lose the odd tank here and there, and wherever they do push, they take out our stuff as well. But here we do take out their gigantic tank. They had this one heavy tank among their ranks, which was called a Buta Stalin. Not sure what that means. Maybe it's a captured Russian tank or something that they've repurposed. Well, a grenade takes it out, so yes, surprisingly effective, those grenades from the generic Gvardia infantry squads, which I think are just our terrible riflemen, our conscript tier infantry, I presume anyway. Overall, we're still getting bombarded all over the place, but it didn't go as badly as I thought it was going to, and after a while, we're going to win on the timer. Because we started with most of the map under our control, and the enemy didn't take that much of it during the timer's elapsation, we end up being declared the victor, and it's sort of harsh to the enemy here. They don't even get to take the towns, the hills, the positions that they did capture during the battle, because the game only works on a square by square basis. If you don't take half or more of the square, you're not considered to have captured the whole square after the battle, and so you have to leave and give up everything you took. Therefore, nothing happened is what I'm saying ultimately there. The enemy went away, and we've maintained the pocket. In our turn, I pushed forward into that block of enemies I was harassing again, and this time did a big auto-resolve that took out most of them. So that means we have secured a route out of our little rear position towards the enemy's rear, where we need to go, and by capturing this circle on the ground, which is a town I presume, a large town, it allows us to spawn units here. That's what that little tooltip above it means, the flag post that's been set up on it. We can deploy our fresh units here instead of at the edge of the map. They can teleport forwards. Very useful for us, as you might guess, because now we can deploy units much closer to the objective. Our goal will be to mass here and then go down the 2 roads up to the northwest end of the map where the objective awaits. For the rest of the map, all we're going to be doing is hoping things don't go too wrong and defending against the enemy when they do things like this. That battle we just fought, it essentially happened again, as the enemy just tried to do it again in their next turn, and it's still the same couple of things fighting each other. Annoyingly, the defenses you put down aren't still there, even when you fight on the same map. I had hoped to see them there, and maybe to have the ability to build on top of what you had already with another set of defenses, because you were dug in for 2 turns instead of 1, that sort of thing. But the main problem is just that it takes a long time to put the defenses down. You get something like 6 kilometers of barbed wire to place and a load of trenches, and I felt obligated to put it all somewhere. But it takes 10 minutes to do that, essentially, and the battles are already quite long, so this elongates the battles even further. I wanted to try something new, so I've brought in the planes to control for myself. These things were hit and miss, quite literally. We first have fighter bombers, and I thought we could use those guys to come down this nice open road and just start bombing all of these vehicles that are coming onto the map. And you can in principle, but they're not accurate enough to do this to any reasonable degree. They will bomb vaguely around where the enemy are. They're not precision bombers in that regard. So most of this huge column of vehicles is going to come onto the map and harass us. I had this plan of fighting the enemy as they came around a corner, but I'm not around the corner enough for this to really work. They're not getting close enough before engaging. We do take out something there, so it worked a little bit. But essentially tons of panzers will just overrun our position there. I had hoped that my Komroshi, hidden in the trenches, might do something about this, but as you might know if you're an expert,
Komrati don't have an anti-tank grenade weapon. I think Komrati is like a commander unit that buffs nearby allied units, so just having them there in the trench wasn't doing anything at all. Well, that's what I think in retrospect anyway. Of course, I never checked. I just sat here for most of the battle trying to get the fighter bombers to do something about all of these vehicles. Every now and again they would nearly hit, but what tended to happen almost every time is that the bombs fall short. They always fall not far enough along the path of attack to actually hit the enemy unit. Sometimes it will damage them anyway though, because they have a big area of effect. But generally, it wasn't doing the business, and the enemy are capturing this big town in our area of the map. The only upside to them massing so much right here is that the rest of the map is being contested quite handily by our allies. So we're actually seriously winning, just because the measure of who is winning is just map control across the entire map. So while we're losing tons of units, we've lost a major settlement there to the enemy. We're going to win this battle and get it back by default if they don't capture loads more stuff right now anyway. We thought I was trying more bombing raids on these clustered up enemy half-tracks, which wasn't quite working unfortunately, or working at all. At least, they're wasting tons of time trying to take out bunkers and single units like this poor unit of Gvardia here, which is being fired at by everything the Germans have by the looks of things. They're surviving for a while, which is good, and the other advantage to this is that everything does have finite ammo. So all these heavy machine gun rounds coming in, that's stuff that can't be shot at other units. So I suppose those men might take heart in that service they provided. They died in such a way that it was uneconomical for the enemy, and that's the end of that. I was hoping, of course, the enemy would drive a little bit closer and we'd get to throw some grenades out, but it just didn't go that way. We're being overwhelmed by the sheer number of heavy machine guns on half-tracks just all over the place. Not much our mainly infantry-based force can do. Theoretically, our air force can stop all of these stationary half-tracks, nice easy targets. They just almost always miss, although we did see one hit there. I was microing it quite heavily to try and get as many bombing runs as possible off. Here I had 3 bombing runs coming in against the same group of 3 enemy half-tracks, and you can see how they all miss in the same way, so they're sort of accurate in an inaccurate sort of way. They always fall short. Maybe we're training our pilots wrong or something, or maybe they're hoping the enemy would be moving forward while they're attacking. They seem to be surprisingly poor against stationary targets in the open, broad daylight, all the time in the world to get it right. They just can't do it. We also have our regular gun planes, our fighters effectively, which we can use to dive down and just shoot their machine guns at infantry, which sometimes does something. The only issue with fighters is they're very micro-intensive, because once they've fired at a target, they've done their strafing run, and then they'll just go back to patrolling the area. Patrolling is useful because enemy fighters are in the air, as we see here. But they weren't firing as efficiently as possible because I wasn't paying enough attention to manually setting their targets. There was some sort of auto-strike mode I discovered later in the campaign, but I never got it to do anything useful. We'll see that if I ever want to mention it again, probably not. After the battle, well, the enemy did win this time. They took enough of the map. We made them trade for it. They've lost a lot of number points in the bottom right, although it doesn't look like they lost that many actual squads. You know, I already mentioned that the way the game determines how much strength a force has lost versus how much of its actual squads were lost is a little bit unknown. Well, the penalty for losing that battle isn't too much. I think because it was only a minor loss, we don't go into disorganized mode, we just have to retreat. Curiously, you don't have to retreat away from the enemy, so we actually advance during our turn because of that quote-unquote retreat. But now we're closer to the enemy, and they attack us again. This time I decided to just auto-resolve, thinking, well, this group's a goner, they're already defeated, they're probably going to get defeated again. We actually got the same result right there with the auto-resolve, and the exchange of units was fine basically. We retreat back to a better position. Both sides have been damaged about the same amount, and I thought, well, that saved half an hour of real-life time. A very valuable auto-resolve, and as mentioned earlier, this would be the perfect game for something in between fighting for 40 minutes and 4 seconds, something where you have a little bit more gameplay, but not that much because I'm busy. Well, we're ready to do the campaign objective now. This is the only possible strategy. We've already used up nearly half of the entire time limit and we've barely done anything. We just need to use the fact we've captured this spawn point to spawn everything here and then rush up the 2 roads to the objective.
For now though, it's time for some less important action on the other front lines, because I did some experimental battles. So here's the first one, where I could bring in this Spur-Art-Rugged awesome artillery essentially, and I thought that's interesting, maybe I can try controlling the artillery and see how that plays. The issue was that I saved the game there, then came back another day and didn't remember that the artillery are in phase C, so I actually can't use them for any of the battle really, so that didn't work. It might be that because the battles are so long and it's hard to commit to just doing them, that means I have to more often just stop playing if a battle takes place and then come back to do it another day because I won't have time to finish it if I do it right away. Which is just an annoying aspect to having these big separate parts of the game, the exact same problem that Total War has. Although in this game, I never tried it, but I think you can actually save during battles. Well, for this battle at least, I don't have anything to do whatsoever, but that's great. Now I can play the game like I want to play the game, as a battle watching simulator. So I can just observe the AI doing stuff and watch tanks firing their guns, and there are loud banging sounds which causes neurons in my brain to fire, and that's really all we need from this game. Look at the things going bang, isn't that nice? The only thing I was thinking about while watching this is that it would also be nice if you could see tanks be disabled instead of destroyed. Essentially in the game, a tank is alive or dead. What can't happen is a tank gets hit in such a way that it needs to stop and the crew goes away, and then you would still have the tank after the battle in a damaged state. Well anyway, enough about that. Here's a cool thing I did see while looking around. Sometimes enemy units will surrender to you, and if you zoom the camera right down, you can actually see them doing it, which is nice. They probably could have got away with the unit just disappearing if it's considered to have surrendered, something like that, because normally you'd never see it. But it looks like they did bother to make animations for it, which is nice, but again, potentially a waste. The battle between making a game that looks good when you play it, and a game that looks good on the Steam store page continues. You have to put the work in for what are essentially non-gameplay relevant features, so that you can have screenshots that potentially dishonestly market the game, but not technically. Rant, rant, rant. We end up winning the battle as it turns out. I didn't have to do anything, and it only, quote-unquote, took 15 minutes of doing nothing to get that win. Looks like our side actually did particularly badly there, with not very good kill-death ratios, considering how dominant we were. Well anyway, a random enemy group that was out on its own is killed there. Here's a more important battle over here though. The enemy have actually cut off my group defending this crossroads, because they drove through the woods there, and now that the enemy have their map colour painted over us, we are out of supply. Your units are supplied every turn, but they have to be in your own territory to do it. And to be quote-unquote in your own territory, there has to be some sort of route back to an unspecified point, I guess somewhere off to the right-hand side of the map. So because the enemy captured that road, even though technically we're not out of supply because they didn't capture, say, the woods on the other side of the road, we can't be supplied, so we need to fight the group on the road. Again, we have an overwhelming local advantage, so this will be an easy battle. I decided to take advantage of this by using the tank regiment this time, so we're going to try some tank gameplay. Here I am discovering the use of this move fast feature. When you give an order, your tanks will move in formation and they'll move slowly. But there's this other mode you can enable that makes them drive faster and move in a column instead down the road, which is just faster overall. And of course that's important in a game where it's not necessarily important whether you have parts of the map strongly under control, you just have to have a lot of the map vaguely under control, so rushing about all over the place gives you an advantage. What doesn't give us an advantage is trying to take this town with tanks. I discovered the hard way there was an enemy unit sitting in a building there, and before we can get away we immediately lose 2 of the T-34s. So like with our infantry, the enemy infantry will just pop tanks instantly once you get within range of their handheld weapons. So we have to keep our distance from this town. This will be an issue because we have barely any infantry in the regiment I'm controlling. I can't easily go for another approach. I need to take it with tanks somehow. So this will come down to besieging the area effectively and just trying to snipe the enemy out of buildings. But they don't have to reveal themselves to us, so we can't always do that. At least when the enemy do come out, when we aggro them, we're fine, because we can just back out into the fields and stay out of grenade range, and then machine gun and high explosive round them to death. We can tell though there's more stuff in the town because the territory markers don't lie. The fact that the town is considered enemy territory means there's something there, And it's a similar deal over here. The enemy's territory is mysteriously advancing towards us in the area we don't have any eyes on. But of course, we can just use the territory itself to do our recon. We know where the enemy is advancing because the map is telling us mysteriously. So that's useful, isn't it? Well, we still haven't got into the town. I'm trying to besiege the town and surround it here. However, there's a really good anti-tank gun on a hill back there, almost hidden in a forest. It starts firing at us, and I was just like, well, those two T-34s that are in range of the anti-tank gun are just doomed. But luckily, the second one manages to take out the anti-tank gun. I didn't expect that, because I thought in the balancing, it would be such that anti-tank guns just dominate tanks in a similar way to tanks dominating infantry. But perhaps they're being more realistic about it here, because yes, an anti-tank gun is just a tank that can't move to some extent, and is also weak against tanks in the same way that regular tanks are weak against tanks. Well, you know what tanks are also weak against? Driving them into a forest in a vain attempt to capture a random flag point, and that forest being full of enemy infantry. Looks like I decided to not go through with it all the way there. But yes, we did some very bad tank tactics in this battle, lost a whole bunch of tanks, but we did defeat the enemy. This actually doesn't do what I want, because again, while the enemy are routed, they route forwards further into our lines, and that even is considered to be them capturing territory, so we actually are further out of supply after the battle. What we can't do is capture territory from the enemy's side of the line. This is a little bit of an abstraction really. I can sort of see what they're going for, I suppose it just doesn't completely make sense. Perhaps the rule should be that routed enemy units aren't considered to be blocking your supplies or don't capture territory in the same way as regular units, so that maybe our territory would come back over us now, the sweet map would decide that we get supplies. And the other thing to mention is that you barely have any supplies. If you're out of supply for 1 day, your force is also considered routed. And I don't think you can do anything like stockpile supplies or put supply trucks with the groups or something so that this doesn't happen. It's just a really fast way to die, essentially, but luckily, in the next turn, with that red barrel next to our units meaning they're about to die due to lack of supply, we're able to delete the enemy on the road because they didn't technically exist due to that disorganized thing, so just thinking about fighting them causes them to explode. And then we do that weird maneuver with the recon battalion, where we go back down the road and then back up it again, and that's considered recapturing the entire area. So everyone's back in supply. The supplies appear to come in immediately during the same turn, so we're not out of supply for this turn anymore as well, which is incredibly generous. I would have expected it to make us be out of supply until next turn. Well, we'll come back to supply issues a bit later, because I tried to use this thing I've discovered here against the enemy, but I didn't have much luck with it in the end, so clearly there are some more rules about supply, and we'll look at that in a bit. You can see that things are going vaguely to plan though. We've started to get 2 columns going up the road towards the objective. The enemy are blocking that one on the left, and they're effectively blocking the one on the right as well, because there is some stuff near the road that I might need to deal with. And the other issue is that the stuff in between the 2 roads, those infantry groups we see, could move out and just cut the roads from behind if we really rush the objective. So to some extent, rushing forwards isn't going to work, because you can't load up on supplies. Like, if it takes us more than half a day to get to the objective, our troops will be too hungry to go on, and it seems we can't do anything about that. I sort of almost don't want to believe that's how the game works, but that appears to be how it works anyway, leading to a situation where I can't really go behind the enemy lines and cut off their supplies, because my supplies would be cut off if I did that, because I'd be going away from my own front line. So I don't know. Can't we put some things in our pockets, guys, or something? I guess not. We'll have bi-daily deliveries of guys with giant spoons bringing the supplies to your mouths. I'm not mad. It's time to do something productive. We need to break through on one of the roads up to the objective, because this pioneer battalion blocking our way is digging in right now, so we've got 1 turn before they'll have loads of defenses here, and it will get harder for us to get through. So even though lots of our stuff hasn't caught up, we don't have the full blob that was coming up this road available. We're going to try and do it with these 2 motor rifle brigades. That means we're going to have tons of trucks and conscripted rifle squads. Will that be enough? Well, the enemy doesn't have much either, so we're essentially fine here, but it's going to be a bit of a slog. We have numbers on our side, but they're going to have more cool stuff. They'll have more machine guns, mortars, and special units like that. So we end up effectively stuck in various pockets of forest, really struggling to advance because every time I left the forest there'd be a machine gun somewhere that would appear in my line of sight and just start mowing everybody down. So he gradually pushed up on the right extremely slowly, had a bit more success in the middle where there was a big town, and we essentially garrisoned our way up the lines of buildings using mortars to bomb parts of the town when I spotted enemy units there. I'm trying to use mortars to clear out the forest here as well, but missing mostly by the looks of things. And you can see there's that MG42 at the back, just firing on our hillside position all the time. And everybody's getting very stressed out and getting very killed in some cases. The enemy also had air support, which wasn't helping very much either. Here their bomber comes and does this massive dive strafing attack. I don't know if those gigantic bombers can even do that sort of maneuver. Well, we just lost a mortar crew, so our advancing potential here is out the window. But we can always just run at them, and because we have so many guys, that's not so much of a bad strategy. Although it's aided by the fact the enemy essentially started falling back. We didn't really defeat them in this battle, they just moved backwards to regroup, I suppose, and I moved forwards very aggressively and claimed more flags. And of course, that's all you need to do to win. We don't need to be actually defeating the enemy. Doesn't matter that the fight itself wasn't going that well. We take the central town as well, and then I just sat back for a while because we were in a position to win if we didn't really do anything, so I just waited for us to win. We do win the battle. It was a bad exchange, but strategically that was an important one because now the road isn't defended with any trenches or bunkers or anything like that. And we can defiantly take the square the enemy was sitting on, I suppose. Very slightly helpful at least. This extends our control over this road, although that in turn makes the enemy's strategic wang there down the middle even longer, so they've got even more positions they can push out from to the sides and cut us off. Although that of course works both ways, as we'll see. I also need to attack this artillery regiment that's sort of blocking the other road, but not really. There's not much in that regiment because they've been involved in battles earlier, so I thought let's just pile in against them and take them out. But we actually didn't get the easy auto-resolve I was looking for, probably because this regiment with loads of artillery guns in it is essentially strong against everything, in that the artillery guns can be used against all kinds of units. So we take a load of losses, the enemy take a few losses, but now there's so little in that regiment that they sort of don't matter. But as mentioned earlier, on the campaign map, an empty and a full regiment aren't really distinguished between. They have the same supply concerns and the same ability to capture territory. So we do still have to worry about them being there. But as you can see here, we finally cut the enemy's wang right down the middle. This actually causes one of their groups to now be out of supply immediately as well, so that's good to see. We can do this to the enemy. I should note, by the way, that the enemy weren't actually attacking out of their wang, they were mainly walking backwards and forwards, so we've been okay so far. We're getting away with having this weird formation. The game's complaining that I'm taking too long. Yes, we are almost out of time. We really need to press the objective here. But first, another distraction, because they're trying to break out of the town again. It's a tank group coming up against a couple more of our rifle brigades. This is another situation where we don't really have any anti-tank capabilities. We have no tanks ourselves, and we have a couple of anti-tank guns here and there. I was disappointed when this map started because I realized, oh, it's the same map we were fighting on earlier when we were defending against this same panzer group, I think, but it was somewhere else. It was on a different road that time. So it seems the game doesn't have a map for every square, which I thought it might, or something like that. Maybe it was generating them in my mind, I don't know. I think there are actually only a few maps. They're handmade maps, so they're good in that regard. But they are going to repeat, and here we are, sort of fighting in the same place we fought before, but it's a bit different. At least that means I had some ideas about where to put the defences down, since I'd already been studying this map for half an hour, cumulatively across other battles. And my main goal, of course, is to make the tanks get close to our stuff so we can have a chance to kill them. And here is the enemy doing the right thing, just sitting back and shooting at us with their main tank guns. Not much we can do about that, or anything we can do about that. However, they don't always do that, and this is where we're going to be in business. We've got this one unit sitting in a trench line on this hill. There's a flag up there, so those tanks might want to drive up there. They can drive up there without going past my infantry, but they don't necessarily know that. And as they drive towards the trench, I guess my guys are invisible to the enemy or something because they're ducked down.
but we're just throwing grenade after grenade out, and 3 grenades grabs 3 kills. They're incredibly effective against the tanks. It was just out of control. It's almost disappointing how powerful infantry are against tanks at the quote-unquote melee range. I feel like it's like that because it's supposed to punish you in multiplayer for not paying attention, not micromanaging your tanks too much. Feels like tanks should have a little bit more ability against things like thrown weapons against them. But then again, it's one of those things where it probably was like that. It's just a myth that tanks are good because tanks got destroyed constantly in World War II by just about everything, and just throwing Molotov cocktails at them or something was probably good enough to do the business. We end up completely winning, a total victory as it says, because after losing all those tanks, the enemy seemed to lose their momentum as well, and they didn't really attack anywhere. Meanwhile, I was attacking them, allowing me to end with most of the map under my control. And the advantage of doing that is it causes the enemy to be routed, so it's unlike a regular repulsion of their attack. They actually got destroyed themselves in the process. They retreated so hard that they've gone crazy, and now they barely exist, as the game says. They now have nobody in Tank Group 20. Still not quite sure about this UI decision, it's so confusing, but what it's essentially saying is that if I click on them, they'll explode. So here I am doing that, meaning that after that battle, where we barely killed any of their tanks, the actual result was that we killed all of their tanks. Now that's something of a trade. A pretty sneaky move really. It seems that going for a really easy defensive victory and then just taking the free offensive victory you get afterwards is the way to go there, because if I tried to just attack that panzer group, we would not have been able to achieve anything like that. I suppose you have to rely on the enemy wanting to attack you to make it work, but seems like an okay idea. We move up and capture that town on the train line, and that's going to be the end of that for now. We'll probably come back to the defenses of this random pocket later. I wanted though to cut off the entire town, and we actually have the opportunity to do it here, because I've moved up to this town and these bridges that are the only thing connecting the main town to the rest of the map. However, for whatever reason, after cutting off this area, the units in the cut-off pocket are not considered to be out of supply, and nor does it do the thing where all of the cut-off area is just considered to be your territory after you've cut it off, which is what happened earlier. So again, I don't really know what the rules are about whose territory is whose. Potentially because the enemy have that major town there, that town is considered to be permeating their territory through the area, so we can't cut off this pocket and remove their supplies, anything like this, in the same way that we can do it with smaller pockets as we saw earlier, and as we saw done to us. What are the rules? What are the rules? We just don't know. So we sit back and hope that this will do something, but I think I might have wasted my time going to take that place up there. Could have used the units to bolster the defenses here, or sent even more units to go and do the main objective, which probably would have been the right call in retrospect, because as mentioned way earlier, just doing the main objective is really all that matters. All this other stuff, trying to hold the line back here, I don't know if it's important, I don't know if you can lose if you don't do it, but it doesn't contribute to the victory, I suppose, in an obvious way. We do have a big win over here, because the enemy were once again moving through the forest in a way that would cut us off if they succeeded, but we just dogpiled on them with everything nearby and had an auto-resolve that killed the enemy so bad that the entire unit was just exploded on the map, even without them being routed first. So I guess you can kill the enemy outright in battle. Feels like that's something you could only do in an auto-resolve, because in a real fight they probably wouldn't deploy all of their stuff onto the field if you were beating them that badly, because the game would end too quickly. I don't know, possibly something to keep in mind there with the meta, that auto-resolving might give you a better ultimate result if you're too powerful. Now the AI is going to waste my time in a cunning move. It's going to do the stuff that I sort of hoped wouldn't happen anymore. After cutting off this pocket, I thought maybe all these units here would just go away. But they're still in good fighting order, and they want to fight over here in the east. We've got this gigantic battle with loads of stuff potentially involved. One thing you can't do is, say, mouse over a unit and have it show you all of the enemy units that are quote-unquote in range of that unit. Because the way roads change the range of things, it's a bit hard to guess how close an enemy unit has to be for it to be potentially in battle range. So stuff that's right at the back is being involved in this battle, although because both sides can only bring 5 things, we can't have a complete decisive battle here, which is a shame, I think. I suppose because the battlefield is of finite size, maybe it does make some sense that only some amount of things could fight. I saw online you can actually get, say, 10 versus 10 battles with really wide battlefields, bigger than the ones in the campaign.
So something cool could potentially be done. It was not done here, and instead we are fighting tons of enemy infantry. It's mainly infantry attacking us here, and I'm controlling mainly the planes. This is quite cool, I thought, because once you mass enough planes in the air, in the theatre, while the enemy also have their planes involved, I was constantly focusing them down as they came onto the map. So we were able to maintain air superiority and trade very effectively with the enemy air force in this area. While on the ground, the AI is doing the work, which mostly is just standing around because we're the defenders and the enemy weren't attacking that aggressively. I do also have the artillery regiment under my control. I was still hoping to do some artillery barrages, but this artillery regiment, as it turns out, it's just anti-tank guns, self-propelled anti-tank guns basically, and I seem to recall you couldn't even order them to fire at infantry with high explosives or something like that. So they proved to be almost entirely useless because we weren't really facing vehicles. Instead, I'm mainly just getting the fighters to strafe some of the more important enemy units and try to take out enemy fighters as they appear, so I can take out machine guns and mortars that I spot and hope that our AI-controlled infantry will do the rest of the business. It didn't really do it. We're not winning this battle technically because the enemy did advance a bit. We're currently counting down to a draw. Here I am observing this strange battle. Everyone's just standing around hip-firing machine guns at each other in wild spray and pray matches, having a great time. The way infantry fights isn't simulated in much detail, so they're just sort of like blocks shooting at each other. And again, I don't mind because ordinarily you would never see this, and if you're playing optimally you should never see this. It's just a shame to look at it and be like, well, that's weird. Doesn't really matter. We just constantly strafed that blob of infantry, killing them. The ultimate result, after half an hour of doing that, is that we drew, which means we don't lose, so we don't have to move on the campaign map, and we don't lose our entrenchment as well, so that's nice. But it was actually a tactical victory of sorts in that the enemy's units were heavily depleted. We took out what must be most of their fighters and tons of their infantry. They lost 2 melee power worth of infantry units, whatever that means. Essentially hundreds of troops, but they have thousands in this overall area, meaning we haven't stopped them from doing this again. And most importantly, because we didn't technically win the battle, there's no rout effect, we can't counterattack after that and take them out. Things just remain as they are, which is the most boring possible outcome for what I think is not important at all, the fighting happening over there. It really was a waste of my time in retrospect. Here I am trying to take out this tiny artillery regiment in the woods here at the end of what remains of the strategic Wang. There's basically nothing there. 1 machine gun, 1 squad of infantry, so like 10 people, and 2 artillery guns. I tried attacking with planes, and curiously they actually fought us off with their couple of artillery guns because they're flak guns. It's saying here there's an AA battalion somewhere firing at us, and we fought with them, and we actually took out units that don't appear to be on the field from what I could tell before. I get the feeling that if there's an AA company attached to another unit somewhere on the map that's vaguely near your battlefield, they might be considered to be taking part in the fight because you flew over them on the way or something like that. So something happens, we lose some planes, and then we fight this battle where there is just nothing on the field for the enemy, but they did bring in their bombers to attack me as I was advancing, so we can just claim the map for the most part and shoot at the bombers. We had a couple of units that were anti-air units. Our vehicles with machine guns on top could fire at the enemy bombers, so we did something to them, but we just lost a load of units, captured the map, and finally made that Wang a bit more secure. So that's looking good. The only real worry about the back lines now is that there's still an untouched enemy unit that is out of supply back there. I was wondering if they might disappear. It does say in the tooltip I'm looking at right here that after 2 turns they are routed, and I suppose that means we can ignore them. They can still walk to the west and cross that bridge and get back into supply in that bit of the woods on the left there that I haven't bothered to go into. Technically, it feels like they shouldn't be able to be supplied there because there's no way for the enemy to actually get there easily. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. We're going to ignore them is the point I made. The AI also tried to do that thing again, pushing through the woods to the northeast to cut me off here. And once again, I've still got all my stuff just sitting there, so we dogpiled them and took them out. They also had some units who were challenging our position at the town and bridge, which is completing the cutoff. We took them out with an auto-resolve, but again, I don't think any of these actions matter in retrospect, because we don't need to hold that position. It wasn't doing anything. I could have just moved on. And every battle that isn't a battle for the objective doesn't affect the outcome of the campaign, as far as I can tell anyway. So we're here once again fighting to defend the eastern end of this pocket where if we just lost, I think that would be absolutely fine. So I probably should just auto-resolve so I can avoid having to do a real-life fight here. But to some extent, I did want to play the game. So here we are doing the actual gameplay to hold them off at this location again. We don't have that much this time, but neither do they. Both sides just have loads of infantry. This is to our advantage because we're dug in and we don't have to hold all of the map to win. We just have to draw by holding some of it. So we've just got guys sitting in trenches, firing in these big open spaces where it's hard for the enemy to advance without being fired upon the entire time. And I think the AI is somewhat good about avoiding bad scenarios for itself. So if you make it such that it can only attack you by running across open ground, it just won't attack you at all, and that is what I think I saw in this battle. For most of the fight, the enemy units stayed back near their deployment area. You can see them there just sort of wandering around, trying to stay out of my range, I guess, but not attacking me very much, and I would occasionally just shoot mortars in their general direction when I saw them. For the most part, the two sides aren't firing at each other very much. We did actually kind of start losing the battle. We got overwhelmed at this position further along, where everybody in the trenches died. The enemy had the chance there to run forward and capture those trenches, which would make their life a lot easier. But unfortunately for them, the time limits ran out. We level up again. The second time I've reached level 2 in this campaign, if you're watching very closely, so not sure if the XP system actually works. But anyway, another draw, another nothing happens battle. It was a very long battle. Both sides supposedly lost 3 melee points worth of stuff, but again it looks like the enemy lost a lot more than me. I felt like it was a good trade, but who actually knows in the end. We shot at each other for half an hour, and then we both decided to go home and just leave everything as it was, and that's going to be the end of that. Now we need to turn our attention to what we're supposed to be doing. We are even closer to running out of time, but we are somewhat close to the objective now actually. This group of units that's just forcing its way up the road is one turn of movement away from the objective, but because the enemy's reinforcements spawn here, there's tons of stuff defending it, meaning we need to have a decisive battle to just have an all versus all brawl so we can win enough to get something through the mess to the objective here. For this battle I needed to be tactical because the map has a gigantic town in the middle and I'm controlling the tank regiment, so this time we know, don't just charge forwards. Instead, I began to surround the town somewhat, and also set up positions on various hills and ridges with great lines of sight against an advancing enemy. But of course, because of the map control thing, this isn't good enough, which is just sort of a bit annoying really. I'd like the idea that if I just came in here and surrounded the town and locked the enemy down, that could still be considered a victory of sorts. Well, because the town is in the middle of this square, we'll have to take it to win, because it's the squares who decide who win, effectively. That means we need to advance somehow. For now, we surround it and just shoot in, because infantry kept coming up to the edge of the town. We'd see them and then shoot in, and we took out loads of infantry with the tanks in this fashion. The main thing we're going to do to try and stop us losing the battle from this situation, which we will, is go up the edge of the square. Handily, the square is on my side to some extent, because it stops us from outflanking each other, so I can have a powerful flank push that the enemy can't dodge. And because they mainly had infantry in these areas, presumably with most of their stuff having been sent to the town, I found it quite easy to go up the very edges of the map. The only issue is that we're driving around really near these forests, so it's quite dangerous. We could get ambushed. And 3 tanks, as we've seen, can be easily defeated by 1 infantry unit in seconds if you're not paying attention. So just advancing with 3 tanks is not safe at all. So we're trying to be, well, cautious. Don't advance too far, stay close together, and just blast everything all the time. Meanwhile, we are starting to capture the town somewhat, because the enemy are running out of stuff. I didn't really show it because I wasn't looking at it during the fight, but our tanks were constantly spotting and killing infantry in the town, so not advancing was very effective. Here's a case though where advancing is going to be ineffective. I was being bombarded by something, we couldn't see what it was, but you can see the trails of the shots in the sky, so I could vaguely guess where the enemy had a mortar or something firing at my tanks here. And as I started driving down the road to get over there, what do you know, there really were infantry hiding in these forests, and we instantly lose the first tank. Luckily, because I was actually looking, we can order the second tank to not drive up to them as well and start reversing instead. And once the infantry aren't in range of their insta-kill weapons, they're easy enough for tanks to take out since we have a heavy machine gun and high explosive rounds to use. The other thing I was doing, which I also didn't really capture in the footage, is firing on the road between the town and where the enemies spawn. These units at the back there are doing that. This stops the enemy from reinforcing the town, and after a while, our allied AI just started overrunning the town. And really, the battle started going extremely well. We've captured enough of the map to win now, so we don't have to do anything else, but we might as well capture some more, because if we turn it into a total defeat, the enemy lost most of the map, then we'll get that rout on the campaign map as well. There was an interesting thing that happened here, where I wanted to resupply these tanks at the very back, because they're running out of ammo having shot so many things on the road. So I ordered a supply truck to go over there. The thing is, the supply truck has its own ideas about pathfinding. Unfortunately, if you order a unit to go to the back of the map, it will drive through enemy territory to get there. So that's a bit of an issue, isn't it? And what happens, or what appears to happen at least, is the truck was captured because it disappeared, and then we can see it there at the bottom of the screen still driving around, but now it's an enemy truck. So it seems our guys just defected, or the enemy stole my tank ammunition, and now we don't get it. Instead, I had to order the truck to come into somewhere else, somewhere not too close to the front line, so it's less likely to pathfind in a stupid way. Well, we don't really need it at this stage. You can see just looking across the map, we have overwhelming numbers of units all over the place. It's really just my lack of micro holding us back. If I'd been advancing more, we would have won even more. And here's the eventual result. We lost basically nothing in that decisive final battle, and the enemy lost loads. It was extremely successful. It seems that just playing a little bit tactically pays off quite a lot, or at least having tons of tanks when the enemy don't pays off quite a lot, I should say, really, because it was just the fact that our tanks couldn't be killed by anything on the map that allowed us to win. So long as I wasn't too stupid with them, of course, so I suppose some tactics were involved. The big thing, though, is that because it was a total defeat for the enemy, a couple of their units are now in this disorganized state. We really need to just get this concept, the disorganized thing, right up at the front of the campaign tutorial, because this is so important. It makes such a big difference trying to focus on disorganizing units. And it should at least tell you that if you attack a disorganized unit, they die. That's a pretty big deal. Well, anyway, so we took out some of them, but we're just going to skip to the end now, because all of that was a red herring, because we actually won the campaign in a different way. The other road going to the objective, well, there wasn't much on it in a particular turn. It was defended, but there came about a turn when it wasn't, and I just drove all the way up in that one turn, and bang, we won. I didn't expect that to happen, because what I figured was going on was when it said capture/hold the town as the objective, you'd have to take it, and then sit there for the remainder of the turns, and the Germans would have the chance to take it back, which would also add more purpose to this idea of holding them in the pocket at the back, trying to stop stuff not be near the objective for the endgame battles. That would have made sense, I thought, but it's more simple than that. You just have to get something to the town, which now in retrospect makes me think, like, so much of this campaign was pointless, actually. I had this experience before with Total War, I seem to remember. Once you realise that the objective is really strict and really simple, and that most of the stuff you do isn't part of the objective, you start to wonder, why is it like this? In retrospect, I had less fun now that I know this is how you win, because you probably could have grabbed a recon division or something which moved further than all of the other kinds of things on the map, and just driven it, say, up to the top of the map and then come down to the objective from the top, and just sneakily driven in there in one turn where there happened to not be an enemy unit sitting on the objective, and suddenly you'd win, something like that. Well, here's the scores at the end. All of those other battles do contribute to the score. Don't think the score actually does anything. I suppose for bragging rights, you can win more than other wins. So we didn't get a total victory, we got a major victory, I suppose. I could have killed more of the enemy during the fights if I really wanted to, but I suppose I didn't, and maybe that's a problem with the game, I don't know. So we come away from that. I do remember someone saying in the campaign tutorials that they expected even new players to lose far more units than the enemy if you play as the Soviets. Well, it went the other way around. We seemed to dominate the Germans there. We didn't lose very much compared to them overall. And we also had more units than them. Maybe this was just a particularly easy campaign. I don't know. Things went fine. We completed the first campaign, or one of the campaigns I should say, and from the achievement data, we could see that I think it was like 5% of people have done that, so a relatively rare thing to do, possibly because nobody's playing the campaigns in this game because they're not really about the campaigns. Or maybe they are, I don't know. There's plenty of stuff in here, but it may not necessarily be what people buy this game for, because it is a multiplayer game, which is of course one of the weaknesses, or probably the core weakness of the campaign, is that it's also sort of a multiplayer game being played in single player. You can see me here poking around in the menus, and when I mentioned there was a 20-minute tutorial that didn't even get out of the main menu, this is the reason why. There's all kinds of things in the main menu which are based around setting up for multiplayer, I think. Like here, all of these different companies or divisions, as it says. You can click on and look at what units they have in them, and you can change what units are in your custom companies. You're essentially setting up your deck for a multiplayer battle. One thing I liked about this, though, is that while you're doing this, you can look at the units close up. So a chance to make use of the fact they've bothered to model all of these units, and presumably they're historically accurate or something as well. And here I am comparing two kinds of T-34 developed in different years. They have slightly different turrets. One wonders why that might be, and there's a fun, historical, engineering conundrum to look at. What reasons might they have had to change the various parts over the years? You can see that in the later variants of the T-34, they changed everything. They made it way bigger, so I suppose they found some more materials by 1944 and started just making these serious heavy tank versions of the thing. Pretty nice looking, but not as iconic as the smaller, cheap-ass version from earlier in the war. Well, you can look at stuff. There's all sorts of different units in the game to look at. You can look at the units that are only in the DLC as well, which is fun, so I can sneakily take peeks at units I'm not allowed to actually use. There was something I found a bit later while also looking. It looks like I spent like 15 minutes just looking through the units. There was this little thing here that looks kind of like a frog. It's classified as an armoured personnel carrier. I suppose somebody could lie in the back in that little trough or something, or maybe there's some heads inside the two eyes on the frog. So somebody's in there, I suppose. It doesn't look like it has weapons or anything like that, but it could be fun to drive around in the weird, claustrophobic coffin frog car. Not quite sure what that is. I'd never heard of such a unit, even after playing a billion World War II games and such. It seemed pretty cool. Here I am looking at the stats screen, really just to show you that the stats are all broken, which is always good. It says I've won 1 victory against the medium AI. I'm pretty sure I was playing on easy, but whatever. It also says I've had 13 skirmish games and lost 1, defeat 1, draw 0. So who knows what happened to those other skirmish games. I'm guessing it considers each battle in the campaign to be a skirmish, but it doesn't record the stats correctly, so it messes up your stats if you play the campaign. Well, at least it doesn't mess up this stat. Campaigns played 0. That seems safe. At least the game does not even register that I have played it. It thinks I didn't do it. It says no game played. Thanks, game. Thanks for recognizing my achievements. I felt like I played the game. What's all this footage? Where did I get this footage from? I don't know, because I actually did not play the game. Here's something that I think if I was left to my own devices, I would probably spend a lot of time with because I am a loser. It's the replay system. You can go back and watch the battles, but this time you don't have to control it, and you can even turn off the UI as well to just look at stuff, and this would be particularly useful for looking at competitive games from high-level players. So I like this idea. It's one of these things where this is what I want to somehow integrate into the main game design, the ability to just enjoy the epicness, the simulated battle violence that you get from the game, which isn't always obviously there because you're so often high in the sky, not really seeing it. I want to see my T-34-85 Comrati shooting at something that it can barely see in the distance there, because, I don't know, it's just sort of authentic looking right here. You can sort of tell that something's going on from the ground level, whereas from the top level, you're just looking at pictures and words moving around and shooting at each other. Well, presumably shooting at each other, you can barely see them shooting half the time. Anyway, as we enjoy these people fleeing through the fields of gigantic cabbages, I suppose we'll wrap this video up, because I didn't play any more. There are 3 more campaigns, of course, and you can play it in multiplayer, but I'm not interested in that, really. What do we think about Steel Division 2 then? Well, my overall impression, my sort of final thought that came to me when I completed the game earlier, when it was suddenly completed unexpectedly, was, oh, I'm glad that's over. So I was happy to complete it because I didn't really want it to keep going, and I suppose that's the thing that will inform my overall opinion of the game. I thought it was quite cool. I really like the game engine. I like the concept that the game has in it. But when playing it, I sort of wished I wasn't. I kept thinking the battles were too long. I didn't like it when battles, in retrospect, weren't very important, so I sort of liked it less after playing it than I did while I was playing it. It was more fun at the time, But now that I look back on it and commentate on myself playing it, I think, well, I guess it wasn't that fun, in that it wasn't that important or interesting at the time. I was mainly just in a state of confusion because it was all new to me and I didn't quite know what was going on. But now that I do know what was going on, it's less than I thought there was. It was actually a little bit worse than I presumed the game was, in retrospect, if that makes any sense. Well, I suppose the core of the complaints is just that it's a multiplayer game being used for single player, as I said. If it was more generous about deciding what is a win or a loss and not basing it quite so much on map control, perhaps basing it on strategy. Say, for example, I don't care if I leave the battlefield, I can still consider that a win for some reason. For example, my goal is to defeat the enemy, my goal is to make the enemy fight for a turn so that they can't move on the campaign maps, things like that. I want that to all be possible without there being arbitrary rules, so the men decide to rout if we don't advance in a battle where my only goal was to retreat, things like that. And this would allow you to do things with the partisans, as mentioned earlier, do ambush-style battles, or do battles where you're just setting up a really good perimeter, like taking the best terrain and just fighting on it, just having a battle of attrition against the enemy, which you can't do because it would be considered a loss if that terrain isn't in the right place with regards to where the squares have been drawn on the map, which is just completely arbitrary. And again, it's all because it's a multiplayer feature. It doesn't necessarily make sense if you're trying to give the battles a context on a bigger campaign map. So I think if something like that could be changed, and if the one other big feature that I really wanted, the ability to draw a line on the map instead of having the circles for determining where the AI should go, then that would be it. I want to go into the map, look at the map and say, here are some good lines, literally draw the line, and the fight will start. Your lower level commanders, aka the AI, will deploy to those points that you've said along the line, and they'll be a little bit less micro, so there'll be more time for just looking at stuff and looking at the terrain yourself, seeing some of the action. And I suppose there'd be more strategy to it, because it's less arbitrary to just be capturing places where somebody's put a flag on our map. Let's take this random bit of woods. All of our troops will die if we don't, because, I don't know, Stalin has decided it. Perhaps there's something authentic about the way in which higher level political leaders would be involved in military decisions and say, you have to capture this town. It doesn't matter whether this is a good or bad idea militarily, it's a political dictate. Well, Sun Tzu wouldn't be happy with those things, but nobody actually reads The Art of War, they just say that they do. Not sure what I'm talking about right now. Why don't we just get out of here? Steel Division 2, a game with tons of good stuff in it, but I didn't find it to be a good game overall. I'd rather not play it, but there's enough in here that I feel like with a few small changes, I'd probably really like it. And I did actually go and watch, by the way, a competitive multiplayer game, and I found it moderately interesting, because when the players know what they're doing, and when the commentator can talk about all the various decisions that are going into things, it kind of works. It makes more sense as a multiplayer game, because you're bringing in units one by one. The decisions about what units to bring in and where and why take the place of what would normally be the economic decisions in a competitive game. So while it isn't going to hold up to something like Age of Empires 2, which has that and the economic decisions, so they're much more complicated games to watch and potentially more interesting for that reason, it's a cool way to see a World War II battle take place with real people controlling all of the various units and there being actual logic and strategy to it, which I enjoyed. You can get something a little bit like that by playing it yourself, but for the most part, you might be left wondering why everything is like it is, and why you can't see any of it happening on the ground as well. I want to come onto a map, I deploy the entire regiment at once, I draw a line on the map, the regiment deploys to that place, and fighting starts, and we start putting arrows on the map and stuff to determine where the regiment's going to move, where it should defend, and essentially doing Hearts of Iron 4's campaign map gameplay in real-time tactical battles. Make it work. Right, there's my request to Eugen Studios. Steel Division 3. It's kind of like Hearts of Iron 4, but it's a tactics game. Or, alternatively, actually scrap the tactical battles entirely and just have the campaign map system from this game be the battle resolution for a Hearts of Iron 4 style campaign. So the top level thing in this game is actually the bottom level thing in this new game that I'm now inventing, Hearts of Steel, coming soon. Well, I suppose I'll just get out of here. Overall, the game seemed a bit fun, it's got loads of cool stuff in it, but it clearly wasn't designed to be played in the way I wanted to play it. But because that stuff, the campaign map, the single player, is here, it invites criticism on it, so I don't feel too bad about complaining about it the entire time. At least we got to see a gun go bang and some flashing lights on the screen. That's all we can hope for from any game, really. I'm out of here.